the Grand Union Canal. We are actually going to join the Regent's Canal in a minute, but first off, just to introduce the trip and what I'm going to be talking about, what you're going to be looking at. The Grand Union Canal is one of the main canals in the country, and the canals are man-made waterways. So they were built, and they were built for industry more than 200 years ago. So where we are, before 1800, used to be pure countryside. So the reason they built the canals was so that boats could carry industrial items. This is before the railways, way before motor cars. And the Grand Union Canal actually turns right beyond the sea, beyond where you see the island on the right hand side. The Grand Union Canal, and the cormorant just flapping drying its wings on the right hand side there. So it comes to a dead end away to where Paddington is on the right hand side. Underneath the blue bridge ahead of us, it's actually the Regent's Canal, which will take us across the north of central London to Camden. But we could turn the boat around and take you all the way around the country. Say for instance we went to Birmingham, which is about 2 hours away by car. On the canal, in the boat, with an engine, it would take about 2 weeks. So canal travel is very slow, and I have to say that's the way we like it. But it was slow throughout its history, and the history is what I'll return to. I'm also going to point out the pathway that you see on the left-hand side is particular alongside the canals because it was built for horses. A horse used to pull the boats along the canal, so way before engines were invented, the horse walked along the pathway. One horse could tow one boat. So I'm going to return to the subject matter of the horse, but it's just to point out that the environment is all connecting to the history of London, the history of the Industrial Revolution and the Transport Revolution, and it's at the back of everything you're looking at. The context. But these days we don't use the canal very much for industry, we use them for enjoyment, for pleasure, for walking along the pathway built for the horses, for taking trips like you're doing this morning, and for living on. So the boats you see on either side, and we're going to see some now and quite a few between here and Camden, these are actually people's homes. You might just notice there's a big gap on the right hand side as well. That means somebody's actually taken their home on holiday, probably. When I say that they're people's homes, they're generally people's full-time, permanent, all-year-round homes. And by the way, these are not houseboats, these are what you call narrow boats. The shape and the length, that kind of square shape, that's a typical style in the UK. It's called a narrow boat, not a houseboat, nor is it a barge. So the canal provides this place for a kind of lifestyle choice. And here and there I suspect you'll get a glimpse of people living on board. And as we go past boats that have people living on board, not only do we go slowly on the canal, we go extra slowly, just to keep everything very calm on the water. Now you may get a glimpse inside and see kitchens. The kitchens use bottled gas for cooking and heating water. They have a coal or a wood burner for keeping warm in the winter. Some of them even have radiators. And they also have a sitting room and a bedroom and a shower and a toilet. A large water tank on board that will keep them supplied with enough water for a couple of weeks. And if you look between the boats, you can see a cable running on board. So these are in their own private mooring spaces. And this is the Maida Vale moorings, this beautiful section of the canal. It's been this home to this collection of boats, changing over the years, but only been part of the modern story of the canal since the late 1980s. Around the country, there's thousands of people that live on the canals. Just a little word about the boat you're sitting in. And if we take just a quick look round inside the boat, contrasting with the ones that we're looking at. The boat you're sitting in is not like the ones you're looking at, because the one you're sitting in is a proper working boat. At the back here, the cabin behind me has an engine room behind it. And imagine bringing up your family on board a working boat because you lived on the canals, you earned your money transporting cargo in the space where you're all sitting. It's like about the size of a wardrobe. This would have been the living space. But today you are the cargo. The boats we're looking at, people use the whole boat to live on. So it's a contrast from the ways of living in the present on and alongside the canal and the ways that the canal has been used throughout history. Now your boat, this boat, which is called Jason, is actually 117 years old. It goes back to the days when the boats were pulled by horses. Good job we've got an engine today, because we're coming to a long tunnel that has no pathway for the horse to pull the boats through. Notice the scenery constantly changing. The tunnel takes the canal through a hill, and in the past the horse couldn't pull the boat through, somebody would have to take it over the hill. They carried on board a wooden board that they put across the boat, like a plank of wood, leaning across the boat from left to right, resting where your elbows are, and then two people would have to lie on the plank of wood and stick their feet out to push the boat through by walking against the walls of the inside of the tunnel. The contrast of moving things around in the past to now. So now we're in the Camden tunnel. Like I said, good job we've got an engine, but as you will have already noticed, it's a bit noisy with an engine, so just going to leave the commentary to whether to get to the other end, towards the other end. Just remind you, just keeping elbows and phones and heads inside the boat as much as possible. Between 1812 and 1814. This is one of only two long canal tunnels in London. Dates way before the London Underground. Just invite you to stay in your imagination about when the boats did not have an engine. And two people who just loop the boat through, walking against the walls of the tunnel, lying on a plank of wood on their backs. Get to the end of the tunnel, and somebody would be waiting with the horse on the left-hand side. So the horse has been taken over the hill that we've just come through. Now you may be wondering what the horse is, how come a horse could pull a boat along the canal? May not be, but it could, and this was the way it was in the past. In fact, you could pull the boat along the canal, basically because the water takes the weight. So notice the engine just closed down a little bit there. We could switch the engine off and the whole boat would keep moving. It doesn't really take a lot to move a boat along the canal. It's very slow, but very smooth and very, very reliable, and also cheap. Now this is another tunnel ahead of us. It's much shorter and there is a pathway for the horse. If you're still with me, you need to look to the left-hand side as we go into the tunnel. You see the white line painted on the bricks? If you look just underneath the white line, there's a piece of iron fixed to the bricks, and there are grooves on that piece of iron, which are rope marks. And I will explain, because there's another piece of iron at the other end of the tunnel, because the rope between the horse and the boat used to drag against the corners of things, wearing away at the bricks, or, in the case of this tunnel, wearing away at the iron protecting the bricks. So, just where you see the light hitting the corner of the bricks there, you can also see how deep those rope marks are. Detail there really is a lot to look at, but it's really my attempt to just kind of get your eyes into details and the background and the history that is visible. Different things going on, still on display from the past, telling us that where we are is built and used for completely different reasons from how we're using it today. So here we are, going past some more boats. Again, these are all people's homes. So again, going slowly past boats that are people's homes. And by the way, we don't see any famous London landmarks here. That big building behind the boats is the St John's Wood electricity substation. It's doing something like transforming and cooling cables, distributing electricity. The boats here are actually paying a little bit less than the ones we've seen already. They are moored end on to the pathway. But the whole environment looks like it might be some kind of canal boat village. A very wide part of the canal, however, was built for industrial reasons, not to accommodate these boats. If you keep looking left, as most people tend to do at this point, through the boats, at that wall that runs along the back of the boats, that pink wall with the trees and the foliage running along it. That is what's left of the original power station that was built by the side of the canal to take delivery of coal, which they burnt in furnaces to make electricity. The original power station was built alongside the canal in the middle of the 19th century. So rather than this strange but fairly peaceful, I say extremely peaceful environment with people living on board, this would have been one of the busiest industrial hubs of the canal. But if you can see along the back wall as well, there are arch-shaped marks, kind of indentations, that when there was a power station there would have been tunnels that would allow the boats to deliver the coal to where it was needed inside the old power station. So the whole space that we're looking at does somehow convey a contrast and a change and the history that has taken place since the first days of the canal, right through to the 1960s when they were still burning coal here. And trains still bringing goods and coal into the space on the right hand side, which would have been a big coal and goods yard. It's now the edge of a housing estate. Contrasts in why the canal is here to how it's being used today. But everything we look at has some relation to how time has changed London and the look and appearance and the way that the canal is used. We just pick up a little speed. simply because we're not going past boats and people's homes. The noise of the engine and of trains crossing the canal as well, connecting what we're looking at with the fact that we are in a city, we're in London, and on the canal it's also a place that provides a lot of railway lines going into Marylebone Station. And also part of the London Underground goes over our head just here, which is the Metropolitan line, taking trains into and out of Baker Street Station, which is on our right hand side, but about 10 minutes walk away, and that's just about 1 minute if you're on the train. So looking at the backs of buildings, looking at the underneath the bridges, connecting with the city, different perspective from down here on the canal, essentially because most of London would have been built after the canal was first here. Moving ever onwards, the scenery changes completely once again. So it's one of the loveliest parts of the Regent's Canal. We are going around the edge of Regent's Park. Some people follow where we are on their phones. So on our right hand side we have Regent's Park, except I have to say we can't see Regent's Park. And there's a good reason for that, which I'll go into in a moment. We don't see Regent's Park, but let's see what we can see. On the right hand side, these are buildings that were made in the 60s and 70s, but these are also people's homes. Those are the Regent's Park villas, the modern ones. There's also a home on the left hand side. Just look up to the left now, there's a big cream coloured building called Grove House. About these buildings, the fact that they are probably some of the most expensive private property in London, amongst them. So we look at the back of them and into their back gardens. On the other side they have their gated driveways. And then beyond that, a lovely Regent's Park, which was the development of London taking place around the same time as the canal was built. So we look in the back gardens. Imagine what it's like to live just there alongside the canal. And then take into consideration that the garden that you see on the left hand side is just one piece of private property. And that runs from the last bridge all the way along to the next bridge. One single private garden, which is beautifully designed, really well planted, really well looked after as well. It's a treat to see this. And it has nothing to do with those buildings you can see. From here it appears in the same scenery, but those buildings are actually flats on the other side of a public road in St John's Wood, a neighbourhood away to our left. So what we're looking at here, what the canal goes alongside, is only really visible from down here. In real life. Hard to imagine that people didn't really want to live by the canal in the past. When the Regent's Park was first built, that is to say the park that we don't see, that was designed for what used to be woodlands and hunting ground. If we wanted to keep the canal separate. So these days the Regent's Park villas are part of the modern story of the canal. And even those posh properties come to an end underneath the Tyburn Bridge. I just mentioned the woodlands. Before the canal and before Regent's Park, this part of London would have been the rest of what we see here, these trees. Remember, before the railways, before the Industrial Revolution really got going, most of London would have been really very separate. Macclesfield Bridge. Now you're going to notice that it's a place where people live underneath the canal bridge these days. It does have a story about a dramatic explosion though. In 1874, a boat that had a cargo of gunpowder accidentally exploded underneath this bridge. So there's not really enough time to do justice. You get a sense that this is a place of stories and legend, but that was a true and dramatic accident. Just about everyone, whatever language you speak, you just notice that people do live on rough underneath the bridge on the canal, just 2 minutes from some of the most expensive private property in London. So just bear in mind, we're doing a little bit more than just cruising gently past a bunch of trees. You're in the middle of one of the biggest cities in the world, where it is the home for people that have the means and more than the means, but also people that have to live underneath the bridge on the canal. The City of London, just about a mile from Leicester Square and Piccadilly Circus on our right hand side. The photographers here wouldn't even tell you that you were in a city, let alone in the middle of London. So before the Second World War, I hope you get the idea that the canal was used constantly for industry, even helping to build the railways and the roads, moving construction and materials and cargo around in both directions, connecting with the River Thames. And the tradition of people that lived on the boat had kept going throughout most of the 200 years. After the war, that began to change. It's a slow decline on the canals, and because they're not that deep, when you stop using them so much, they tend to start overgrowing and collapsing. People throw a lot of rubbish into them. So it wasn't until about the 1970s and 80s that the canal started being used again for a way that we take for granted today. It's a very quiet trip. First one on a Thursday morning. Just remember this as well, when you, later in the day, you get caught up in the busy London. This is a really gentle start to your day. Here, the canal goes alongside London Zoo, as it has done since the zoo was first opened, which was, by the way, in 1828. You may not see anything in the zoo, but keep looking on your right-hand side for the moment. In fact, we did see something there. Didn't set that up quite well. There are some warthogs there. On the right-hand side, there's another enclosure, which is the home for what are called African hunting dogs. No way of knowing whether one trip or the other is going to get a sighting. So far, no fingers going up. Right off on the way, and in half an hour on the way back there will be some. On the left hand side, this structure here is the home, what's actually called Monkey Valley, and if you look closely you can see some colobus monkeys. The people inside that structure are looking at those long-haired black and white monkeys. Colobus monkeys. That's quite an exciting result for the first trip of the day. Quite often nothing is visible from down here. But that Monkey Valley was originally built as an aviary. In the 1960s it was built as the Snowdon Aviary. can imagine, lots of trips don't see a thing, so whether you did or you didn't, I am here to say that the wildlife, the bird life on and alongside the canal is just a source of seeing animals in central London. I did get a photograph there of the African hunting dog. Unfortunately, there are no boats that actually drop people off at the zoo anymore, which is what that platform was about. If you're thinking of going to the zoo, I can tell you that it's a simple and very pleasant walk back to the zoo from Camden, walking along the towpath and crossing over one of the bridges that we'll be going under in a moment or two. Take you less than half an hour, I think. We've been doing our top speed. I do mention the sounds of the canal. I just enjoy it when Barry turns the engine down. And this is the real sounds of central London on the canal on a Thursday morning. Just about walking pace. Although we go slowly, everything we see, perhaps not everything, but what we see ahead is generally soon to be alongside us. You can anticipate the changes of scenery ahead of us, and then you're in it. So moving away from the section where the canal goes around the edge of Regent's Park and the zoo, we're actually, the truth be told, slowing down because we're going to be passing more boats that are people's homes. And this arrangement on the right, these are people's actual houseboats. I'm just going to let the church do the talking. It's 11 o'clock, and this is central London, and we start looking all around us. Wherever you're sat on the boat, different aspects of the past and the present and what's going on and what has been going on. So from this Victorian church that we can hear there, that will be alongside us in a moment. Not an especially famous church. It's called St. Mark's. Ahead of us, not sure how famous this is, but the big red building is a Chinese restaurant called the Feng Shang. So the sounds are important. That's Barry just sounding the horn because we're going to be turning left. And that's just in case there are boats coming from the left on the blind side on the left. So it's another corner that you wouldn't recognise as being London perhaps. And this is called Cumberland Basin. In the past, where you see the boats to the right of the red building, with the red restaurant, there's a bit of the canal that used to carry on. So towards there was when the canal was helping to build the stations. The Euston railway station is about a quarter of a mile beyond what you can see on the right hand side. So that's the canal that got filled in when they were changing after the Second World War. So now we just have this left hand turn, which means that we're now pointing to Camden. And if you were walking back towards the zoo, you could walk back this far along the canal and get up onto the street there and cross over on the bridge that we just came under to get over to the park and the zoo, or just to walk into town if that's what you want to do. Now you see the back or the side of St. Mark's Church. I really don't know what people make of that, but I can tell you that it's built in the 1850s. It's not particularly famous, but it's significant because it's not as old as the canal. But it is near Camden, so the surroundings, including the people that live and work and go to school near Camden have these streets that were built after the canal. All sorts of little clues, the fact that you're coming into a different environment, different from what we've just been looking at. Although it's still pretty green and lush, and we are going to see some more contrasting ways of living in London and on the canal. For example, the boats on the left are another set and a variety of different ways of living on the canal, the ones on the left. They're using visitor mooring spaces, they don't actually own the space that they're tied up to. The boats we've just seen on the right hand side, and there's a few more on the right, they're not people's homes, they're just boats that belong to the people that have these homes on the right hand side. So again, we're looking directly at the back of buildings that came after the canal was built. And we're looking into their back gardens. You might just want to have a look up where you see those white rings and the white railings. Have a look up there. There's normally a cow on the balcony. Yeah, it's still there, freshly painted. So it's a bit of a contrast from one side of living on one side of the canal to the other. The pathway, remember, built for horses. The private side, the gardens and the property, that was before the canals really started to be revived, was private but much more affordable. So it's a time when people could afford property in London. This would have not been so lush and open. You wouldn't have had basements with swimming pools. Gentrification affects the appearance of things. And we're coming into Camden, and we kind of got to look at the way that Camden was built, and the way that Camden has changed. The fact that this old canal bridge was probably here before most of the other buildings we're about to see. The second bridge we pass under here is actually the Euston Railway line. So this bridge was the oldest, or is the oldest bridge over the canal in London, and it dates back to 1838. Now, Harry is only just a friendly little warning to what we're about to see ahead of us. Using the canal for a bit of kayak practice. It's quite a delightful scene of the activities that go on at the pirate castle. This is about using the canal for recreation, enjoying getting out and about on the water. These people are in the space that used to be an industrial environment. The castle's been functioning like this since the 1970s. But the building where they're starting from, with this jetty here, this is all to do with industry, and the drinks manufacturing industry as well. Oh, alright. You can see that there's plenty of attention gets paid to the surfaces. Quite often people are working on vinegar spraying as we come into town. And the bridge that used to be part of the drinks manufacturing industry, this bridge actually frames our entry into Camden itself. And the big white building, background to somebody else that finds a way of living in London. The big white building was attached industrially to the pirate castle. Originally this was a gin distillery on the right. Again, this is another example of gentrification. Most of the buildings, you could probably tell, are actually flats or perhaps offices. But looking ahead, anticipating where you're going to arrive into, you can tell this has got a lot more to it. And just people living in flats in this famous part of London. Famous these days for its modern market. But what's on display as we come in, remember, on one of the oldest boats on the canal, this is displaying the history. Quite clearly, the tunnel underneath that 19th century warehouse, that's so boats could unload and load up with materials and goods and commodities. The tunnel has not been bricked up because it's still in use. Throughout the history of the canals, a lot of rubbish has been moved around, and that still happens today. They move Camden's rubbish along the canal, coming out of the tunnel there. The towpath dips down, so where you see directly on our left-hand side, that's where we're going to end up. And we're going to actually turn around in front of this iron bridge which crosses the canal. So the iron bridge originally built for horses to change sides on. Very often they're still attached to with a rope to the boats that they've been pulling along. And this is because we're going to turn around 180 degrees to get this good preview of where you're going to be in a couple of minutes. Directly opposite, big willow tree on the left, stop section, just firing up the day. As you can tell, situated operating what used to be stables and wood yards and warehouses. So, turning around completely, we're not going into the Zimmer's walk. Look